Let's introduce this topic today, pitching with purpose. It is to anchor deeply in your highest vision for humanity and then communicate it with authority and
Yes.
clarity to invite others to join you. Joining us is Nilima Achwal. She does transformative coaching on pitch decks and fundraising for pre-seed ventures with a vision for industry transformation, including in healthcare education, food systems, future of work and communities, media, and circular economies, toward becoming more regenerative, holistic, transparent, democratic, and or just. So in all those words, you just heard a lot of things that you don't always hear when you're talking about founders and fundraising and some of that dry stuff or some of that like profit focused things, which can lean towards exploitative and all that. We're talking about holistic, regenerative. I'm going to ask you a question about your language later on, but let's start out
Yeah.
just saying hello and hearing just a little bit about you. Nalima, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, there's many layers to unpack. We're
Yeah,
3 days out of one of the biggest astrological events of like recent years,
yeah.
and
We're just
it
saying she's in
feels
Austin and you
fresh.
were in the peak
Yeah, it
of the
feels very
eclipse.
fresh. And if there was a word that I want to like just have it be the theme right now, it's decentralization. And I don't
Absolutely.
mean blockchain and crypto. I mean the decentralization of belief systems, of power structures, of capital, of access, of everything. And this is going to be the theme for the next 7 years. And if you look at astrology, it goes in 7 year cycles. That's why, because the last eclipse was August 2017, and we know everything that happened like 2020, all this incredible cultural shift and
Yeah.
technological. Now we're all on Zoom. Like everything became like decentered all of a sudden, where I feel like access opened up because, I even know people who raised an entire venture fund on Zoom, let alone like founders fundraising. And so I think that a lot of the centralization of power structures in our industry was basically an offshoot of the financial system, where like centralization is a theme of our economy, and there's just been more and more power and money controlled all the way to the top, right? And that's where the
Yeah.
exploitation, it's like everything's just sucked up to the top. But what's super interesting to me, and like I think that venture capital is such an interesting little microcosm to look at when you look at broader trends, is that so in our industry, that was San Francisco and like Sand Hill Road, and all of the visionaries who had the fortune to like go to Stanford and like be there when that internet bubble was happening. What's so interesting to look at that trajectory, because that's not something that had happened in history before. Like the
Yeah.
technological innovation, the pace of it that we're seeing is unlike anything we've ever seen before. And so, if for people who are like maybe on the younger side of things in their 20s or 30s, we may not even realize that like the venture capital ecosystem in it, like even existing, is really special, because for hundreds and thousands of years, nobody could access even like 500K or $1 million to go build something that could scale so rapidly and impact millions of lives, right? So this industry is very new, and it started in the 80s.
Yeah.
And we had our first wave of building the internet. We had our second wave of building the apps and the infrastructure that power the internet. So now we have Uber, we have all these SaaS platforms, and all of a sudden our entire experience has changed, right?
Yeah.
But what I believe is like now this is the era of decentralization. And so you don't even have to be in San Francisco anymore. You could be in Tel Aviv or Nairobi or wherever.
Yeah.
And now I think that the communities are based on like thought patterns and like consciousness. And that's
Yeah.
how we're like connecting. And I think it's from that place actually that we're raising capital, to be honest.
Well, it is so interesting, and I'm glad you brought up I'm glad I identified immediately with that decentralized trend thing because I've been in the Web3 space, crypto blockchain thing. I'm not a crypto bro. I come to it from the art space, from NFT world, January 2021, and being in the beginning of all that stuff. And by February, I could really tell this the same thing with the trend. Decentralization, it is this dual balance thing of like not having trust in central organizations, but also wanting more power as to autonomy, more agency for the individual user, right? And and it's interesting in this space, you hear this phrase about crypto or about blockchain related things about trustless transactions. And that is a dual-sided phrase too. It sounds like trustless, we can't trust anything, but it's like the
Yeah.
truth is, it's like you take it for what it is. It's everything's evident there. And so it's a different way of relating with the world where that those power systems and like who has ownership of things and like where does those things lie and what can you rely on and what is out in the open and transparent for everybody to see and deal
Yeah.
with.
Yeah.
So it's a cool foundation upon which you can build, a practice around talking about raising funds and around like how do you speak to people with this new language? How do you pitch with purpose within this new era, and that you're identifying, this trend. You're also pairing this with again with not an exploitative approach. You're talking about regenerative. You're talking about holistic, democratic, and all these things. So tell me about yourself. Like, how did you get to? We'll go with a little background about you. How did you get there? And like, were you always this way? Did you have a transformation? What's your background with that?
Oh, I had so many transformations.
In
Phoenix
1 minute,
journey.
in one sentence. No, like, just a
Yeah.
little bit about like, yeah, how'd you get to this point?
Yeah, so I'm an Indian American girl from Michigan. My parents are doctors, so I grew up in like the very typical kind of way, went to Michigan, University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. But my first foray outside of my little sheltered suburban Midwest life was studying abroad in Guanajuato, Mexico, freshman year of college. And it's sometimes there's like I think there's like past lives or like soul fragments or something, but I was like something like came awake in me, and I was like the commute Latin America was such an important playground for me in reconnecting with the aspect of community. And that is so present and alive there over achievement, which is what I grew up with, right? And so I,
Competition.
yeah, and like especially in Indian culture, it's like achievement, just as like an honorable thing in itself. And it's like, what about like community as and like just being as honorable, right? And I think that's the first place I discovered that. And so I went to Latin America several times, after that first study abroad experience. And then I was a Kiva fellow coming out of college. So my very first job, I was by myself in Bolivia, riding around on the backs of motorbikes of loan officers going to visit indigenous women and
Hey,
documenting how microloans had helped lift them out of poverty in Spanish, which is
that's
like a
awesome.
third language. And that was my first job, was like being by myself and like 21 in a foreign country in Spanish.
Oh my. Well,
um,
my family is from Bolivia, from Cochabamba. So that's quite
what?
interesting to hear that. We'll have to talk about
I
that
was
later.
in Cochabamba.
Wow.
And it's so interesting looking like so Cochabamba was actually like historically was a place where power came back to the people because of if you heard about the water protests and they were trying to privatize water in Bolivia and the Cochabamba protests, they made it public again. And so it's actually like a really interesting place to think about from that perspective. But
Yeah.
yeah,
So so what grew in you to get to want to help founders to you've had backgrounds and you've run an accelerator before. You've been a researcher, you're a speaker, you've had a lot of exposure to the space on a kind of a traditional side.
yeah.
What made you take a step to the side and gain this a special perspective to tell people about like how to do this in a different way that
Yeah.
yeah,
So Kiva in Bolivia was the seed. I was like, okay, we can use very powerful systems to enact systemic shifts that empower billions of people. Because what I saw in the impact space, it's like, hey, let's build a well in Africa, or like do this like marginally and good thing, or like let's do less bad, right? Or like let's donate shoes, or no shade there, but like let's do
Yeah.
something that's more philanthropy, right? And it's like, no, actually what I like to look at is like, can the systems that are currently in place be tweaked 1% and then create massive value for humanity, right? And that was like what I saw with microfinance. After that, I was a business case writer at the Ross School of Business of the University of Michigan. And so I was looking at a number of different ventures from like bird's eye view, working with professors and like CEOs, and writing business case studies like that are taught in MBA programs. And I was like, okay, cool. So this concept of transformation inside a system, like what happened with financial inclusion, can be applied to healthcare or food systems or education or any other industry, right? And then I was like, okay, well, let me go experience it embodied on the ground, working with, like, seeing actually what the challenges are on the ground. Because, like, at a high level, yeah, of course, this sounds great. You can, but well, what does it actually mean to do that? So I booked a one-way ticket, moved to India in 2011, and ended up living there for 6 years.
Wow.
And so I went there too, and I went and I worked with a really big accelerator called Vilgrow Innovations Foundation. And so I built and launched and ran their pre-seed social enterprise incubation program. And so we were looking at ventures that were serving what they call the base of the pyramid, so the rural and urban poor, and all of these verticals, and really understanding distribution challenges, consumer education, right? Like capital raising. So this is probably, so we're talking emerging market, base of the pyramid, and early stage. So this is the highest risk asset class. And our job was, our KPI, or our key performance indicator, key metric was, let's try to get 100% of the accelerator cohort to raise capital. And so it's like, normally if you look at a normal venture portfolio, you make 10 bets and one succeeds. We made the bets, we selected the founders. 75% of them raised capital coming out of the program. 80% of them are still surviving today, 10 years later, and
Wow.
impacting millions of lives and have gone on to raise more capital, right?
Wow. So
And so
is that
that was
yeah,
like,
what do you
that's
attribute that to?
one foundational shift in the
Yeah.
way that we think about venture as well. Is like, what if the majority survived, succeeded, and raised capital as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's also, I mean, since 2011 when you started with this, I mean, there's a dramatic shift in availability of money just, I mean, the past couple of years, right? So
Yeah.
that's being rewritten. But yeah, so much changing stuff with this. Has your audience changed, or like now that you're doing this, is there a specific kind of who's drawn to the offering that you have, and how I mean, you're not working directly with accelerators, but do you talk to the same people, or who do you seek out now?
Yeah, so the Female Founders Lab is my coaching accelerator for early stage systems change ventures. And I was a founder after that accelerator experience. I founded a sex education company in India, which is addressing like 3,000-year-old taboo around, gender and sex ed, and inculcating like consent and values-based education in the classroom. And that was the hardest journey I've ever gone on in my entire life. I did not realize how hard it was going to be and how deep the taboos go, right? And how much pushback I was going to get. And so I had this like dual experience of fighting, just getting just so many fires on the ground every day. And at the same time, getting all of these awards and honors in the startup space, and getting into like a Techstars, like pre-seed accelerator, a Google sponsored accelerator. I was on a reality show called The Real Deal. So I'm like talking about sex ed live to like 10 million viewers across India, right?
Way
And
to
so
get the
there's like the
message out.
glam and all that stuff. And then, but at the same time, it's like, they're not actually supporting me in enacting social change in India. They're teaching me how to make a pitch deck, right? And when I'm as a founder, obviously everyone knows, like, it's like there's so many things that operational challenges, and also your own shadows are coming up. So any relationship that you have where there's issues or someone scammed you or this vendor isn't performing, whatever, it's reflective of the leadership that you need to build in yourself. And in my 20s, right, this is like my one of my first real leadership experiences. So it's like you're going through all of that, and the accelerator system has to support you through that, and not actually stress you out more, which is actually a little bit of what I was feeling in terms of like the amount of time and energy these programs are taking from me. And then for like for what? Right? It's like to pitch on a stage in front of like a few hundred strangers, and then it's like, how do I build relationships with them and actually secure that capital? And so I felt like there were so many gaps in terms of like the actual execution of building those skills and identity in myself as a founder and actually securing, getting the bag, like securing the capital. There were so many skills gaps that weren't being addressed.
Mm.
And so later on, I scaled that product out nationally in a partnership with Tata. And so, through their platform, we're reaching about 600,000 students across the country with our sex ed program.
Wow.
Um, but, I moved back to the States and completely burnt out, like completely emotionally, physically, mentally. And
Yeah.
I was just like, just the fire had just burned everything. And I was just like, why was that so hard? Right. And I had to go back to the ground level and I had to rethink, like we're talking about systems, I had to rebuild my system, like my physical, emotional, mental system, and be like, just why was that so hard? Right. And I realized it's because I hadn't been given the tools that I needed to embark on such an arduous journey in an ecosystem where there's a lot of energy that doesn't necessarily align with my vision and my truth. So there's the energy of pressure, of hustle, of scarcity. You have to like gain validation from these other people who maybe don't even care about you or like care about what you're building. Like you have to get them to like it, right? Like that sort of stuff. And I had to deprogram all of those things. And and when I did that, and there's always the fear that like, okay, if I don't do it this way, I'm not gonna get the capital, or like I'm not gonna they're not gonna, I'm not gonna get what you need. But I realized in deprogramming it that I got my national partnerships. I got like the people who were values aligned to me always understood what I was building. They always respected, like treated me with respect. They always saw me and never forced me into like a false paradigm or a false business model that wasn't aligned for what I was building. And so why was I listening to all the other people? Right?
Yeah.
And so I codified a lot of these like inner learnings into my goddess leadership methodology, which I started teaching when I started the Female Founders Lab. And I started coaching founders. And I'm like, if you just switch your mindset to be centered in your beautiful vision that's so important for humanity, and like center back in like, why are you doing this? And it's easier said than done. Like there's a whole process to codifying that onto your pitch deck, and then
Yeah.
like taking that energy into your investor conversations. But if you do that, you're going to raise capital like quantum fast, because you're not wasting time on like non-aligned connections or like, trying to fit into a box that wasn't meant for you.
Yeah. Wow. So much that you said there. That's amazing. Yeah, you can just feel it on an energy level. There's so many like black holes or like gravity wells on the path to like what you're talking about, to your own staying true to your own purpose, wells of energy and wanting the different things from you and different like energetic like they it's stuff that's about them. It's not stuff that's about your things and trying to distract you and get you for their purposes. But you are talking about finding your path, your energy, and staying true to your own version. That takes, that mindset. I was going to ask you later about mindset shifts, but like we can go there right now. That whole thing of like, there's a courageous thing to be able to stick true to your own thing, regardless of all those pressures. Everybody telling you what you should be doing, what you want to be doing, or what they want you to do. And a lot of people aren't trained to just be themselves and like it's going to be okay, or like I got to stick to this, right? Do you find that like how hard is it to get founders to, especially early stage founders, new ones, right? They maybe have never done this thing before. I'm sure you deal with all kinds of people, but we deal with mostly early stage. So like,
Yeah.
there's so much they don't know and so much they think they have to conform to. What's your approach to getting them to that core, to staying true to their core purpose and self and uniqueness?
Sometimes you just need one person to understand the full vision. And so I've been on calls with founders where it's like the first time we're literally ever meeting and they start crying,
Yeah.
right? Because they're just like, you get it. Or they're just like,
For the first
you're the
time,
first
yeah.
person I've talked to who like actually understands the vision of what I'm
Yeah.
trying to build. And I think that there's layers to this. I think you have to understand the industry and you have to understand the opportunities that are there in like many industries, right? And so I'm more of a generalist. I can see things at a bird's eye view in many different spaces. And then from there, you have to understand, you have to quickly be able to assess if there's a product market fit there. And for me, I call that the transformational element. So is there actually transformation happening for a user or for a company, right? B2B or B2C? Um, is there a transformation happening, right? And so for me, that's not something that can be replicated by another company. If you are enabling a transformation, that's something that's encoded in your lived experience. And it's your lived experience that you've encoded into your technology and your platform. No one can replicate a transformative value that you they can mimic a tactical aspect of your tech and your platform. They can't mimic the transformative aspect. And so I'm really quick to see what that aspect is and reflect it back to them and remind them that it's there in their DNA and it's in the DNA of the company. And that's why no one else can do it. And when I remind them of that, they're like, that's where the power is. They're like, yeah, it's me. It was me all along. Why was I giving my power away?
Yeah. Yeah, and that connects. I mean, the purity of that inner thing that first got them to take the step to do this thing, that reconnects with that, and like that's a wellspring, this never ending wellspring of motivation and uh, personal validation, like that. Yeah, that's really cool to hear. So then, um, do you, at the same time though, as a coach, you have to tell some hard truths sometimes, right? Like, do you
Yeah.
have, it's, I'm sure there's a lot of like clearing away the external stuff, but then
Yeah.
sometimes you may have to help them refocus to something that makes more sense or makes like is right for
Yeah.
the current audience. How do you correct in a helpful way, right? Like
Yeah.
without being
So
discouraging to
you
them.
need a canvas, right? So you can talk all day long or like whatever, but like you need a tool. You need tools. You need a way to build the new or like the foundation or whatever you want to call it. And for me, that's the pitch deck. And it's like so funny. It's like the thing that is so hated by founders and so linked to like the old energy of like validation seeking and like all of that is like actually the that's where the alchemy happens for me is it's just so fun to start with a blank canvas. They can throw out whatever deck is loaded with 3 years of rejection and emotions and all of that. And a lot of founders aren't ready for this, but it's really a reset point in their venture journey when they're actually ready to raise pre-seed investment. I meet them maybe like 2 or 3 months before they're actually ready to receive that pre-seed investment, and they're ready for the reset and the clearing at that point.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, and then we basically create the golden narrative, right? And it's like the standard 10 to 12 slide or problem opportunity this, that, value prop, but we're doing it with the encoding of that DNA I talked about. And so they feel so grounded, like so anchored in that story. And then suddenly, then they're like so excited to share it with everyone because it's really telling the story that they want it to tell. And then organically, it's like, oh, I just started talking to people, and then all of a sudden, I'm raising 400K in 4 weeks, and like, how did I didn't even realize when this happened? And it's like, yeah, because you did the unlocking work, then you're just supposed to receive. Like that part is not supposed to be the hard part, right?
Yeah. Okay, wait, the unlocking part, like do you want to explain a little more on what is all involved with that? And before you do, I do want to say I saw the question there from Vishnupriya. We'll get to that. We'll maybe integrate that into the conversation here, but we will get to that. Anybody else add your questions in chat. We'll hear that. But yeah, what about this unlocking? Like, so you were saying that, when they're ready to start getting that revenue and do that pitch deck for the revenue for the revenue
For
part.
the raise,
Yeah, for the
actually. But
raise.
or revenue, it could be for revenue, it could be for whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, fund for funding. Yeah, the
Yeah.
raise. Yeah, what is the unlocking concept? Like, is that so in order to get there, they got to do all that work in front of that.
Yeah, so when I look at the deck, I think the first 5 slides are where all the magic happens. I always say that, like, if you in the first 5 slides, they're gonna be like, this is insane. I can't let this go. Like, I have to be a part of this. And then the last 5 slides, they're checking mental boxes just to be like, okay, do they have this? Do they have this? Does that make sense? And so you can think of that as like right brain and left brain. And so people mistake right brain for like, oh, I have to create an emotional appeal. But it's not like you're not trying to create an emotional appeal, like just, in the false way. What you're trying to do in the first 5 slides, the most important thing I think is framing it inside the industry that you're in and showing that this is a massive trend that is just like it's like the most important thing that's happening in the world right now is this trend. So, for example, AI replacing the entire educational paradigm, right? Or like something that is so big, like plastic regulations coming into place in 5 years that will require certain industries to go zero waste.
Yeah,
Like things that are just like, wow, how is this industry even going to handle this, right? So when you can tap into what that trend is for your industry at that level, and it's sometimes scary for founders to even tap into that big of a problem opportunity space because they're like, oh, who am I to solve this, right? And it's like, well, what you're doing is actually solving this, right? And so it elevates the conversation to like, maybe I am building like a billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar enterprise, and I was like kind of dialing it down to my little problem space, right?
yeah,
But it's like you have to tie it into what's actually happening. That's like you can't look away. It's a train wreck. You can't look away. And then you tie it into the micro transformation you're creating for the use. So you go very macro, then you go very micro, and you say, this individual would have committed suicide, or like she should get deep, deep, deep downward spiral into the deepest pain point for an individual, and how and most of the founders I'm working with actually have such powerful solutions. They are creating a transformative effect. If it's not a transformational solution, like generally people won't come to me, but they are creating a deep impact for their users. Just tell that story, but in the most like leaving the customer in the deepest pain point possible. Introduce your product. We solve this. So all of a sudden, I'm like, you're solving it for John or Susan or whatever, but you've already told me that there's hundreds of millions of Johns and Susans out there. I've linked the macro and the micro in 2 slides. I'm like ready for your value prop, right? So, wow, I've never actually explained that before. I usually just do it with the founders. I've never like actually tried to explain that before.
oh sweet, yeah, hey, that's just super compelling. I love that. You can just get a sense of like that kind of value you bring to the process here, and just kind of all that we're witnessing unlocks right here live on in the conversation. So is this so when you talk about magnetizing values aligned supporters to visit one of our bullet points for the talk, like reframing strategy, you kind of just explain that. Like if you're saying that if you go through these things, you structure your pitch deck with this kind of um, uh, cadence and succession of points,
Yeah.
that is the magnetizing process, or is there something else, or what is, how do you explain that whole thing? Because it's such a great word to throw into the to this context.
Yeah, good job. Yeah. So the codifying of the story into this framework creates the magnet in you, right? Because you're so proud of the story you've put together.
Yeah,
You're not scared to let it be seen. And that story is not just your deck, it's your email blurb. It's like your one line introduction when you go to a networking event. And it's no longer like a drag and like a heavy lift just to like introduce yourself to someone because that wellspring of energy has reopened in you and you're like excited about what you're building again, right?
yeah.
And so that's the magnet.
Nice. Does you find that, like you said, you attract a certain kind of founder? Do they, are there some that like you have to get like, you were talking about going for, just they thought about themselves maybe small and like, having a little solution that could have like global impact, but like do they have to be, I'm getting at the thing, like, are there some people that are like they need to be released to be like the full power that they could be because they think too small, or like they're too self-effacing, or like
Well,
if
they're
they
being
come to you,
pulled
are
in
they
two
already like, I'm
directions.
founder? Yeah.
They're already thinking, they already have the big vision, but they can't sell that to investors because investors are like, that's insane. What's your first product? Like, what is your first market? Right. So they can't like talk about the big stuff because it's too much for the stage that they're at. So the art is in just gently seeding the big problem space, but then quickly diving into the narrow problem space and showing the traction there and your very, your like ground level strategy of like capturing the market and growing the business where basically you should have like a small scenario where even if your first product or feature grows linearly, you're already going to be able to sell it for 200 million, right? That's a good exit, right? But if you get the right amount of capital, if you're like you have the right stuff, your actual vision is to grow it to be $1 billion enterprise, right? So you just have to be like you have to in your brain have a few like scenarios and spaces in order you can't just be like reaching both ways at the same time and that's where founders get muddled.
So these things are, so you're also helping reframe what's possible here, and that changed context changes that deck, for to expand its potential reach. Like that's amazing. It's so good for founders to hear what that's about because they live so often in their own, mind and their own product and their own
Yeah.
things, and so having that outside perspective from you draws even more, gives them more sense of potential for their thing. Amazing. It so how do they, how how do, here's another topic from our bullet point from our thing. How do founders stay grounded, anchored, and powerfully connected to that core vision as they shift and grow and transform, right? Because they start out small, they start to get some traction, they do some pivots, figure out how this thing's gonna go, and then but the grounded anchored connection part, uh you know what, how do you keep them in that proper space throughout this?
Well, that's the next step of the process. So that's perfect that you asked that. So, um, and I used to talk a lot about like goddess leadership, like feminine and masculine energy and stuff like that. But basically the mask and I'm talking about in your body. Like everyone has feminine, it's like Shiva, Shakti, and Yang. But basically the masculine is the structure and the
Yeah.
commitment, right? And so the feminine is the energy and the magnet and like actually like feeling excited to share the story again. But the masculine determines timeline, fundraise amount, and like, how big each check will be. Like, okay, so that's another thing. You're not looking for 100 investors. You want to get a few checks, like 550K checks or something, because that's another part of it is like you can't have 300 calls to, so it's like the old paradigm. Like you go and have 500 calls and 5,000 emails are sent to get the right people, but that's like doesn't work for a lot of people. It never worked for me. It's like even if you have 5 calls a week with people who actually like there's a resonance there, they're either going to invest or they're going to refer you to someone on that same frequency band who might invest. And so it's a very grounded, like very intentional process of just tapping into the right communities of investors or leaders or advisors and being really, really careful about how it's like, because any call that's toxic or where it's just there's no energy, there's no resonance, that is going to pull you down. And the number one thing you need in that time frame that I said, that container of like where you've committed to raise in that time frame, the number one thing you need in that time frame is emotional resilience. And if like you have a call that brings you down, like you're done for the rest of it. Like you can be doing things, but you're not actually going to be using the energy source to create, right? And so it's like we forget all of these things, we let ourselves get low, and that hinders the whole process. And so yeah, a lot of it is around like being really intentional with who you're having calls with as well.
Killer. And I love the language that you use with all of these things. It's such a different approach to this space. Is that just core to your I mean, it's a huge differentiator. Did you like intentionally be like, I need to talk about these things, or is it just who you are? Like, like the things that just how you see things. You seem to have such a clarity for like looking at this space and assessing things properly, and this is what needs to be said, and so few people are saying it.
I had a really long sabbatical after India.
Yeah,
Like, and this is like almost taboo. Like, we don't talk about this. I just like went home, lived with my parents, and like didn't do anything for like a very long time, right? Like,
yeah,
we can't just, it's not just like we don't just go and create things. It's like there's an integration process, there's a shedding process, there's a downloading process, right?
yeah.
And no, I didn't have this skill set before when I was a founder. And I learned it. I knew there was like a bunch that I learned, but it took time for me to like really sit with myself and understand what those things were. And then you find the right language that conveyed what I had learned, and then be able to package that in a way that made sense to other people to consume, right? So that's like everyone knows, like everyone's gone through this process, and that's a process that actually can't be rushed.
Did you know while you were going through it that that's what it was, or did you have points where you felt bad? You're like, "Fuck, I'm not doing anything right now. Like, what
Every
am I up
day,
to?" Like,
every day.
yeah,
Yeah, every single day. I was like, it was just like it feels like a haze. You feel like a lump of clay. It's like, what, who am I? I'm worthless. I suck. We've created all of these identities. All of those identities have to die for you to become who you're supposed to become. And so it's like people are like, oh, you're so badass and like whatever. And it's like, of course I didn't feel like that for like years and years. It's like takes so much work to find that in yourself and to also like say no to things, like just be like, okay, this is what I'm creating and I can't like just you can try to do this other gig or this other job or put yourself in a different space, but the universe will just shut those doors and be like, no, you have to build this thing. And it's like, well, the thing isn't happening. And the universe is like, no, like you just have to stick to it and build this thing. And then you're just like, oh God, okay. Right?
oh, I'm so glad you spoke about this because I mean, like we're talking about refreshing things in this space, and like, I mean, what's the typical like, uh, self-aggrandizing talk we always hear about how everything's perfect and are just, everybody with these great plans and visions for doing things and total execution. And here you are like,
Execution. It's
yeah,
like the alpha male, like the
right.
whole like podcast, like whatever.
Well, it's good. You said you felt, founders can feel alone and we definitely know that kind of thing. And yet in our loneliness, we have a togetherness, right? In those shared struggles, there's so many things that we are actually experiencing together that it's good to hear you say that. You know what I'd like to know as we're getting towards the end, we got 15 minutes left here on our time. I have a question, but I'm gonna make sure we get to Vish and Priya's question because they asked so early. I'll just get it right out, and we have a few other things coming in. So what would you say makes a really good pitch, especially when you're just starting out? What materials are great to have when you pitch?
Um, Materials like pitch deck and stuff, you mean?
I guess, it's just saying, let's just take it a little higher level. Like, if you're an early stage founder, where do you start with like thinking about pitching at all?
So I think like most people, you know about like you'll have a pitch deck template or whatever, but it's really hard for founders to fit like every just the essence of it into a just a 2D pitch deck. And also pitch deck is a lot. Like there's a lot of numbers and like there's a lot that goes into a pitch deck. And so sometimes it's easier to start with something more lightweight.
Uh,
And so I have like journaling exercises around this, but if you can just start with like three aspects, which is, and I do this with like upside down triangle, just if you can see my logo in the upper right hand corner, imagine vision is like the top, and then value, and then method is like the point of the bottom of the triangle. And I have journaling exercises around this. You can hit me up after, they're free. But vision is you really feeling into how can this system or industry be transformed if you reached every single person in the world, what would be the ripple effect of your vision of what you're creating, and so what is the transformative effect on society, right? And then value layer is like is the transactional layer, so that's where money is exchanged to one unique user. And so, what is actually the value I'm providing to one unique user? And um, and obviously, there's a transactional exchange. Anytime value is exchanged, money is or exchanged, right? There's the energy exchange. But like, what is the value to one person? And that's usually different from the vision because the vision happens just as a result of like creating this like really tapping into that product market fit, and even like the your messaging is going to be completely different at the value level than at the vision level, and you have to be cognizant of that as well because like for example sex ed, like oh we want to create gender equality in India is vision. Value is your kids are completely out of control in this classroom and they're not going to pass their exams. Let us create healthier classrooms, right? I didn't even mention sex ed or like gender equality. Who
yeah,
cares about gender equality if you can't teach your class?
yeah.
Right? So you're speaking to the immediate pain point of the user, the customer. And the main thing is that you need to journal on the vision and you need to have it written down somewhere. Otherwise, when you're doing the value layer, you're going to feel like you're missing your bigger vision and it's gotten lost somewhere. So that's later going to go into the deck, but you have to like write it down somewhere so you yourself know your North Star. And then the method layer is the product, service, program, offering, whatever. And that's like, okay, it's going to be like a workshop, it's going to be an app, it's going to be a whatever. But the method is always last. And this is the opposite of the way that many tactical people do it, is like they'll create the product first.
Yeah.
But actually, the product layer is the method is last because the method creates the value, creates the vision, right? But like, anything can be a method. Like, there's like 500 ways that you could create this value for this user. And so that's at the very, very early stages, if you can internalize that your product is dispensable, your features are dispensable. Like no one cares how you're creating the value. And like that's a hard truth because you might have to throw out the entire prototype and create something different. But the earlier that you know that, like the better. because I've worked like I worked with the founder in like the previous accelerator in India where they literally had an entire prototype for hardware. It was like this whole solar powered cold storage thing. And they literally had worked on it for like a year. And then they finally started doing interviews with farmers, and then they're like, oh, they want community level cold storage, and they literally had to throw out the entire machine and like start from scratch. And now they're like a Series D company, like impacting millions of farmers across India. But it's like you need in the earth in the first couple of years, you're gonna waste a lot of work potentially, and like it's okay. Like you have to do that. But yeah, that's the method.
Wow. That is
Yeah,
an awesome inverted pyramid
yeah.
technique. That's fantastic. Um, Another question, super fast, here from Project Beauty, who's contributed some great comments. Wonder where do you find spaces to pitch? Like you, I'm mostly been talking about pitching for funding, but I could just interject that, Founders Live, if you have a Founders Live in your city, that's a casual way to like pitch for 99 seconds in front of a crowd. And for a lot of founders, it's the first time they're going through that process, and like hearing those words and having to distill it to 99 seconds is quite the process, and you'll go through a lot because of that. So so yeah, there are community places to do that, to answer you Project Beauty, but that would lead me to a question to you, is how you coached Elizabeth Arnold, she of Flip App. She won the primetime, not just primetime pitch challenge. She got top votes. She went into primetime North America regionals and won the primetime entire global tournament. We'll
Mhm.
be hosting her in August as part of that prize package, or actually now September. But
Yeah.
what's different about a 99-second pitch? Um, and what did you unlock with her that helped her get there, or was she ready to go and you just had to refine it?
It's an
What
inverted pyramid. You can't start with a 99-second pitch. You have to start with like the entire freaking thing, like the 12 slides, the entire problem space, what you're building, who are you, the DNA, like all of that stuff. It's an accordion. You have to go with the big, 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 get it all out with that's what I do with like a coach with me, right? And then get it all out, codify the big version. And then what's so cool about my accordion style pitch deck is like you can take one line out of each slide and you have a 99-second pitch, but it's the distilled, it's the most powerful version of your pitch that you'll have because it came from the most powerful like version of it.
Oh, awesome. Well, hey, that's like the super unlock. We're gonna have to clip that up just as a little bit of video to get help anybody who's intimidated by 99 seconds, because sometimes they come up to those things thinking, oh yeah, it's sure it'll be easy, and like it's not for a lot of people immediately
And when
clear.
you do the one sentence from each slide, you're like, and then you're like so calm. You don't rush your 99 seconds.
Yeah,
And the slower you go, the more time you have.
I love it.
You have to be like, this is a $10 billion market for blah, blah, blah. We have 3,000. It's like, because each number is going to stick in the person's brain. So it's like, if you just say like a few sentences that are just so powerful, like, that's it. Like, the more you say, the less people are going to remember.
Yeah, that's so true. Some people try to squeeze that like a 5-minute pitch into 99
Because
seconds.
it's not about the information, it's about your energy.
There you go.
Not about the information, it's about your energy. So breathe, be present with your audience, look at people, try to build relationships, right? That's all you're there for.
That is so good. So good. I love that. I've never seen somebody at a 99-second pitch just take that super slow pace and like just be like just exaggeratingly slow, or lots of pauses, right? There's kind of like ticking clock feeling. That'd be awesome.
And
Um,
imagine like you have that ticking clock every day when you're building as a founder, time and money. That is not sustainable. You're going to be building this venture for like maybe a decade. you can't be in that state of like of fight and flight. Like, so every single moment of your life has to reflect the way that you want your venture journey to be. And you have a choice. If you want your venture journey to be stable, if you want connections that are really worthwhile, like a few connections, if you want it to be sustainable, like that should come through in like every conversation, every pitch. Like you should be bringing that stable energy, and your team will follow suit.
Oh, that is so good. I love it. Um, so hey, well, anybody else have any other questions? We can bring those up at any time. I have for you. Do you do you need coaching? What's your are you always pitching with purpose, or does somebody help you get into that state? How does it work for you?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think that I delved into the coaching space around like 2020, which is when the coaching industry was like really, like booming. And I had a few coaches that I worked with around areas that I needed to unlock, like sales and some of those kind of things, and spiritual coaches, and like I've done like, but for me, it's not about like overly over, personal developing. It's really about quieting down and just like listening to my heart. And so it's less about like getting a ton of coaches or doing a ton of programs, but just like maybe this one thing needs to be unlocked, but then I'm like done with it. It's kind of like that for me.
Love it. Love it. I think we have covered so many things that just from listening to all of this that I think that our audience of mostly early stage founders can pull so much from and just begin to feel that energy and have confidence around their vision and purpose. Is there anything else that you want to add before we close up shop here?
Yes. I want to add that it is physically impossible for us as humans to understand the level of shift that the world is going through right now. And I think technology has now reached like flat up and down, like exponential curve. Like it's like we're in a quantum reality at this point where anything's possible. Anything's possible, right? And so I think it's important to know that we absolutely don't know, um we don't know anything. We don't know anything. And most people are really scared by this, and like what's the forecast and stuff. And it's like we don't know, but we get to create it. And so just like take your spot as a creator of whatever you're trying to create in this world, and just like follow your heart, because there's going to be a lot of noise at this time.
Love it. That is an awesome way to wrap up. Well, thank you. I'm here. There in the chat. The femalefounderslab.com is a great way to connect with you and find all your other links. You've got some amazing programs. You're offering things for free to people, which is quite
Yeah,
generous.
so anyone who listened to this and you're like, oh, I really want to like chat more, there's a link to book a one-on-one free 30-minute session with me on my website. It's like the first button. So feel free to book a call with me.
I love it. I'm looking through your options. I was thinking the only thing that's missing is like you need to host a retreat or something like a one day kind of like, do it in
That'd be
Mexico, throw in
fun.
some
Yeah.
meditation and some energy channeling stuff, and I think people would be on board for that. Maybe
Yeah.
we should do combine that with some pitches at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's like come
Founders
down to
Live
Austin. I
Tulum.
do I do like monthly meetups in Austin. So it's like come down to Austin.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today. Everybody, this recording will be on our website in the feed. Zoom usually sends me the cloud version of the recording, within a few hours. We'll have it posted sometime this week. And yeah, check out femalefounderslab.com for all the connections for Nilima. Thank you so
The
much for
the
joining me. Thanks, everybody.
femalefounderslab.com.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us with Founders Live Conversation. 2 weeks from now, we have another one with Brooks Lindsay from Light Legal. Find out some startup questions or legal questions surrounding startups. That's going to be really interesting. Thank you, Wendelin. Thanks, Project Beauty. who's in Dallas. That's awesome. Okay, we're going to sign off and have a great week.
Thank you. Bye.